Welcome all. I'm Colette here today with Witch Ways, and I want to talk about what kind of witch you are, but I want to expand that topic a little bit into where your affinities or your talents might lie, what you might be drawn to, and why. My furnace is out, so I'm just going to have a real cozy chat with you today. Enjoy. It's kind of exciting for people to get a label and know what kind of witch they are. And I think it is really certainly very helpful for people who are just starting to have some kind of label for what type of witch they might be interested in being or what they might have an affinity for in order to do further research and focus your learning. Many of us could label ourselves with any or all of these particular types of being a witch, and that's up to you whether you want to label yourself in any way. People all around the world have their own terms for what style of witchcraft that they use. So this is not meant to be an exclusive list. This is just a list of what I'm most familiar with, having a European witchcraft background. So the first one I want to talk about that you probably are familiar with is being a green witch. And a green witch is someone who works a lot with the magic of plants and medicinal herbs and works often as a healer. And one of the ways that you tell that you are a green witch is you may have, even as a very young child, had an affinity for plants and picking plants and doing things with plants. Another type of witch that you might be familiar with is kitchen witch. That's a term that is applied to people who exhibit their magic through the creation of food. Kitchen witches often have an affinity for earth or fire, also for nourishment and healing. Hearth witch is someone who works primarily through the magic of their daily life in their home. They may put magic into all the small details of their life, whether it's from starting a fire to retiring for the night and asking for a dream. It's part of their daily practice, and it centers around what they do in their house and home. Let's talk about being a hedge witch. When I was younger, that was kind of a slightly derogatory term used by people who did more ceremonial or occult style magic, mostly to kind of denigrate the more common forms of household or food or herbal magic. That was not the case, obviously, for all ceremonial magicians. These days, it's used much more to refer to someone who lived outside the hedge. It's a way of honoring our folk magic ancestors who lived just beyond the boundaries of the village and was someone that you could go to outside the bounds of daily life to get help, support, and advice. Another way that I see hedge witches being defined is as people that can move seamlessly between the mundane details of daily life and daily magic into what is beyond the hedge, what is unknown. There are occult witches. They may also describe themselves as sorcerers or magicians, and they may be people who work a lot with correlations, correspondences. They may include astrology, the magic of the days of the week, and work a lot with various affinities to make sure that their magic is the most powerful and potent. This is a very small description of a very complex topic. So the next group of categories I'm going to talk about could either be types of witches that you might be, or they could be an affinity or a talent you have. I'm going to start with a big one, and this is a witch who has an affinity for holding the gates of birth and death, which are in fact the same gate. They often find themselves in the mundane world, holding down jobs as midwives, doulas, hospice workers, people that work in that profession of helping to assist people through into this world or out of this life. Elemental witches are witches who work through the power of the elements to draw magic in and to send it out into the physical world to make it real. And they will pick which element they're working with based on the type of magic they're doing. It's also very common for elemental witches to be strongest in one particular element and maybe have less of a relationship with others. Air witches are not as common because of the cultural split between science and magic. A lot of witches that would have a talent for that kind of information get drawn into the scientific field. In older times, witches that worked with air were highly valued by people who traveled over water because they could call the winds, and often witches would tie the wind into knots and then give it to people who were traveling by sea, and they could unbind the knot and release the winds if they were becalmed. Fire magic is very transformational. It happens quick. It's very dynamic. It's the quickest way to create change. And often people who are fire witches are very dynamic people. Water witches are people who are most comfortable living, working, spending time near water. They often have an affinity for psychic skills or clearing and dissolving types of magic. They often have an affinity for the dream world and many other types of intuitive skills. Earth witches work with the ability to ground things and make them solid and stable and bring them into fruition. They often like to work with wood or stones as part of their tools, and they are very stable. Let's talk about the witch who works with intuitive skills. We all have intuitive skills that can be expanded and developed. Some people have a lot of ability, but we all have some and we can all get more. I think of intuitive skills as being divided up into three major groups that are on a continuum with a lot of subsets. And the first one I think about is the witch who has an affinity for psychic skills. Psychic skills are all about getting information using any of your senses. They often read people or specialize in getting messages from the spirit world in any way, and they very easily sense energy in a place or in a room. Another step along that intuitive continuum is witches who have a skill for divination. And I think of this as a witch who uses any tool to get information, whether that's tarot cards or dice or throwing bones or seeing signs or portents. And there is a subset of that that is called pattern finders. A lot of people who are good at divination are really good pattern finders. They can see the underlying pattern that connects all these seemingly random things into one message. The final one I want to talk about in this continuum is the oracle. And the oracle is someone who brings information through and speaks for other spirits, other beings. So a lot of witches might have a talent for sensing or seeing beings from other realms with any of their senses. Often this is a talent that shows up very early. Some witches specialize in seeing and working with a certain type of being. Others do not. They see them all. And so often that work involves assisting those beings, having them assist you, or calling on them to empower your magic, or to call on them to get information to others, which brings me to a small subset of witches, the medium. And the medium is someone who works with bringing through messages from those who've passed, the dead, our ancestors. In European magic, particularly Celtic lands, there is a subset of people who work with the Fae, or as modern culture calls them, fairy. Again, this is a skill that appears at a very young age. Children are very easily able to see them. Cultures around the world have a number of supernatural beings that they each work with. And this just happens to be some that I'm familiar with because of my European ancestry. Another way of being a witch, or another type of energy that you might have an affinity for, is working with the underworld. Sometimes people associate that with ancestor work. Some people associate it with baneful work. Another type of witch is the crossroads witch. And the crossroads witch is someone who stands at the place where different options meet at the gates of change, and is constantly doing magic there to create change, whether that's personal change or cultural change. Some people are solar witches, which means they work with the power of the sun. In European magic, this shows up often as someone who works with the wheel of the year as ways to empower their magic. And they might prefer gold or copper or fire-colored objects. Moon witches are witches who base their magic around the phases of the moon and do different types of spells based on what phase the moon is in. They often have an affinity for dream work as well from a very young age, and as a metal they might prefer silver over other metals. Another type of witch, or a type of magic that you might have an affinity for, is creative magic. And these are people who manifest their magic through arts and crafts. And sometimes their objects actually act as gates or portals that bring energy through on a continuous basis. And they sometimes also have an affinity for earth magic or fire magic. And then there is the land witch, or sometimes called earth witch. And this is someone who draws their magical power and sustenance from the land itself. You can do any of these types of magic. You can pick one. There's no real rules around that. It's only limited by your desire to learn and the amount of time you have to pursue it. Some types of magic are safer than others, so do your research before you jump in. Always start small. I am so loving making videos. I never thought I would like it this much, and it really, really helps me if you hit like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of these. I'm looking at getting a Patreon fund up in the next couple weeks so that I can continue to do these videos. As always, stay safe and be well. Thanks for watching.